Hello and welcome to Australia on 99.94 Cricket Every Day. I'm Melinda Farrell and joining me as always is Bharat Sundaresan. Today we're going to be talking about Australia and the West Indies, things building up for the Test summer in Western Australia. Australia on 99.94 is your new home for Australia content, and we'll be dropping into your podcast feed on YouTube or on the 99.94 app several times every week. So please rate, review, and subscribe. Thanks for joining Cricket's conversation. Bharat, how are things in Perth?
Hot. It finally feels like summer has arrived in Australia. I don't know how it is in Orange, but it was not very nice in Adelaide when I left. So it's good to finally be in a place where it feels like it is summer. It's summer officially in exactly 2 days' time, 3 days' time. So yeah, it's hot. I experienced sweat for the first time in many months.
Yeah, too much information. You've just been
No,
trying to
no, no,
tell
no.
me that your shirt is
No,
clean and
it's
washed,
not.
and
I'm
now
not
you're
a. I'm
admitting that
almost
it's
a
basically
Alistair.
sweaty and smelly.
No, I'm almost an Alistair Cook, so I'm very good like with my sweat issues or lack thereof. So that's why I was so confident about talking about sweat. That's always a good podcast, right? Start to a podcast when it starts with sweat.
Yeah, I can say I'm feeling non-sweaty,
Okay,
but
good.
yes, it is.
Importantly,
It is
yeah.
quite, yeah, still quite warm over here in Orange. I've got a bit of FOMO because I'm not in Perth this week, so I'm struggling with FOMO a little bit. But I don't know. In some ways, it's like, do I want to be there this week? What's it going to be like? Because it feels like in so many ways that it's been such a negative build-up to this
Yeah.
first test. In a way, I almost can't remember it being so negative. Of course, it's all sort of whipped up a bit by the Justin Langer exit, the messy exit last summer, rearing its head again. He recorded a podcast and he recorded it sort of a month or so ago, but
Mm,
it was released
yeah.
last week. And not surprisingly, that started the whole ball rolling again. I mean, we've talked a lot about the circumstances surrounding Justin Langer's exit, but what's the feeling been like over there in Perth? Because there's some pretty disturbing kind of headlines about, possible booing by fans at the first test, which I think would be incredibly sad. Do you get a sense of anything over there, Bharat?
No, I think it's been blown up a bit too much, Mel, to be very honest. I think I was speaking to a couple of our journalist friends, like who are hardcore reporters, and I asked them a very honest question. I said, do you think this Langer issue, yeah, I mean, it is an issue, of course, we'll discuss it, everybody's discussed it. But the amount to which it's been blown up, does it have anything to do with the fact that a lot of everyone around Australian cricket has struggled to really pump up this West Indies Test series. So it kind of this is an automatic narrative, and a couple of them at least said, "Yeah, I mean, it's not that anyone timed it that way, but from a journalistic perspective, the timing's perfect, right? Like it's come at a time when you have an organic narrative to build this whole series around, like where it's almost like us, not us versus them, but even the fact that there is a possibility that someone might come and boo or jeer the Australian team, which I don't think it's that big a deal, to be very honest. Like, I don't think there are going to be like some 12,000 people at the ground, like with big banners and like, everybody's going to shout stuff out at the Australian players. And I was at the Wankhede Stadium when Sachin, excuse me, I was at the Wankhede Stadium in 2006 when Sachin Tendulkar got booed by the Mumbai crowd. I think whatever happens in Perth, even if like 100 people come and boo Pat Cummins, I don't think that compares to Sachin Tendulkar being booed in Mumbai. You've spent enough time in India to know what I mean, Mel. So I don't think it's that big a deal as it's being made out to be, especially with Justin Langer now meeting up with the support staff. And I think he had breakfast with Nick Hockley. He seems to be having breakfast with these guys every morning. So from reports, so even though I can see there's a lot of negativity in the overall media, I mean mainstream media about this Australian team and what's to come, but just looking at the teams and going through their usual routines in the build up to a test series, I don't think the players are as invested in this as everyone else seems to be. So I think it's at some levels all to do with nothing, or whatever the term, whatever that phrase is, all to do for nothing, to nothing. You know what I mean?
Much ado about nothing. Now, look,
That's the one I was
we've
looking
talked
for.
about. Okay, so last week we had to have the education on Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. So now we might have to have some discussion. That did lead me, by the way, to send you a whole heap of Fred Astaire and Ginger
Oh,
Rogers
and thank you so much
clips,
for
which
that.
you were.
I was very, very enthralled by it. I have to admit.
Yeah, no, well, now we're going to have to move on to Shakespeare. That's going to
Oh,
be the next one. So
yeah, it's a weakness for me. Trust me, not in a good way, not a weakness in sense. I have very little knowledge of Shakespeare. He did say that thing, right? Like the world is a stage and all of us are players or something like that. Actors, players. I don't know.
very, very good, very
Thank
good.
you. Thank you.
And then there was also something about what is it? Methinks the lady doth protest too much, which I actually thought of when Justin Langer, after sort of saying stuff in the podcast about, he wouldn't say that it shouldn't be said that a source says it should be a coward says. At the
Yeah,
same time, he was talking about wanting players to say things to his face, and then he was basically saying the next week in an interview with Seven, who bear in mind he's commentating for Channel 7.
exactly. Yeah.
No, well, love them like them, but I was really positive about them. So it was a little bit
Yeah.
Justin Langer doth protest too much, unless all I could think of was at best he was being incredibly naive to think that he could say all those things on a podcast and
Yeah.
not. And in fact, in the podcast, people keep saying to me, "Oh, you clearly haven't listened to it all." Yes, I have listened to it all.
But yeah.
And he actually says in there, "Oh, this will probably give you a few headlines at one point." So on some level, he actually knows about it. I mean,
Oh, of
I,
course
I
he does.
think
Yeah.
Jeff Lemon and Gideon Haigh have both written really well about it this week. And they both sort of talk about the culture war stuff. And I do think that is partly what's happened here is there's a lot of noise from people who aren't that invested in cricket or perhaps not even that interested in cricket. But it's because Pat Cummins has spoken in the past about the environment, and he's spoken about issues of racial inequality,
Yeah.
and then now news has emerged that the Australian players are going to take the knee in solidarity with the West Indies players for this series. Basically, that's just a lightning rod for criticism about people who want to shout, go woke, go broke, or whatever the
Yeah.
latest catchphrase is. So I think that the whole Langer thing has basically been latched upon by people who just want to make noise about culture war stuff as well. And there's no doubt that there's an element of people not liking some people not
Yeah.
liking uh, what they've done. I actually went back and read what I wrote when Pat Cummins got the captaincy and how he spoke about no one being perfect and he wasn't going to be
Yeah.
perfect. This whole narrative that was built up about him being the golden boy of Australian cricket,
Yeah.
perfect Pat, clean skin, all that sort of thing. And I just think it's a bit sad when I look at what he said then about, you know, people maybe needing to manage their expectations, and that he was going to make mistakes, everyone was going to make mistakes, and we just needed to be a little bit kinder. So I hope, I never thought it would all seemingly come crashing down like you would think it has, in the media, but it'll be, there won't be big crowds for this test at all. And there haven't been the last few times that West Indies have been out here.
Exactly.
The Wacker, I think they were only getting crowds of about 11 or 12,000 at the Wacker. But for sure and certain, if there are small crowds at Perth Stadium, the same people will leap on this again and say, it's because of Pat Cummins because,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
he's a woke warrior or whatever it is.
Yeah,
You can
yeah,
see it
yeah.
happening. It's just going to feed into that narrative.
Yeah, look, it's basically just, and I put this in my piece as well, which you haven't read so far. Thanks for that. But no, no, I'll
Oh,
send it to you.
sorry. I
No, no, no,
haven't
no.
seen it.
And I'll send it to you. No, no, where I've literally compared it with what I saw happen in India, not from a cricketing sense, but like when India opened up in the 1980s and the 90s, especially the 90s when I was growing up. Um, we started looking at life very differently to the way our parents looked at it, and at that point, there were a spate of movies Bollywood made where it was a lot all about respecting your elders. It was about, oh no, we're losing our Indianness. What about our family values? To be Indian is to really revere everyone who's come before you and all of that. And those movies were mainly, if you think about it, catered. I mean, or who was consuming those movies? It was people like my parents, like who I loved those movies, by the way. Like who were came up during an era where they didn't have the kind of exposure to the world. They had only one perspective, one context to everything, and I think that's what is happening currently, in my opinion, in Australian cricket, where you have, uh, whether you want to call them woke or not, like Pat Cummins and everyone else, or who plays modern day cricket, not just in Australia. They go around the world, spend time in other dressing rooms, see other cultures, how they deal with victory and failure and everything else that comes with playing sport. And they're just more, I don't, I'm not going to say they're more well rounded. They just are more exposed, right? Like to the world. And um, the way that the Langer generation was not, because it wasn't their fault. It was just where how the world was, or world cricket was. Like my parents weren't at fault for thinking that, like, I should listen to them and respect them. But that was their reality. And my reality was a lot different. Just like Cummins' reality and Langer's reality are just different. I think it's more a clash of realities. I don't think anyone's a hero or a villain here, either in whichever way you look at it. And I think that's what it is. Like you said, it's a clash of cultures, clash of generations. It happens all the time. It generally happens behind closed doors. It's just that it's happening on a public space, and also at a time where there's not enough to build up to. I think because of the reputation of the West Indian team, and because they are struggling as a test team, even though I think they've been much better, and we will talk about this after our in our second segment, much better than uh, people think they have been in test cricket anyway. So there is a cricketing narrative to it as well. Hopefully it comes to light once we have the first ball bowled on Wednesday.
Absolutely. And I go back to what I said in one of our previous podcasts too. Almost every generation thinks it's the next generation aren't as, passionate in cricket,
Yeah,
certainly in Australian cricket. Every new generation doesn't care as much about their generation. And I know that feeling is there amongst at least some of the former players that, that they were more about team than the current generation is. It's a bit of a revisionist, convenient
it is.
view of history that overlooks some of the things that have happened in previous generations that might, you know, suggest that wasn't necessarily always the case. So you just have to be wary, I think, of, or be at least aware that words might have a bit of a sway on public opinion, and if you're going to trash and do a big poo on the
Yeah.
Australian team, then you can't wonder why there's a bit of a smell around, as what I think anyway.
Yeah, and
Um,
and the
anyway,
smell will bounce back.
let's
Like it's not just it won't stay with just the current team. Like to continue your poo analogy, we started with sweat, we end with poo. It will kind of bounce back. It's not it's not going to stick just to once it's out there, it's out there. Like so I think the only thing is, even if say a section of the Australian public had a lot of sympathy for the way the Justin Langer era ended, because of some of the words he's used in this podcast, some of them might start thinking about it differently, and that's a risk you run by, like not valuing words that because once you put them out there, like we all know, as journalists, you can't take it back. It's gone. Like it's not a tweet that you can delete.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And just on that note, I think it's quite important to point out too that I think Pat Cummins has maintained quite a dignified silence around
Very
all of
much
this.
so.
The
Yeah.
players have never come out and actually bagged Justin Langer throughout
Never.
all this past year. And Pat Cummins has been quietly going around trying to have individual discussions, coffees, phone calls, all that sort of thing, wh- which is the mature way of doing it, isn't it?
Exactly.
I would think in not succumbing to the temptation of
Yeah.
getting in front of a microphone and actually going pretty hard. He's taken the back route, and I think part of that is the realization that this could be it would be really damaging for Australian cricket for him to give it oxygen by coming out and publicly sort of going and having his direct reply to Langer, but that also takes a fair bit of restraint. So that I think is worthwhile just pointing out as well, and that is basically putting a team in Australian cricket above any personal
Yeah.
frustrated feelings that you might have. But anyway, we'll see what happens. We are going to talk a little bit more about the first test and the upcoming test series after the break.
You're listening to Cricket's Conversation on 99.94. Whatever your team, we have the show for you on podcast, YouTube, or on the 99.94 app. We have India, England, South Africa, West Indies, and now Sri Lanka covered. If you want to find us, the best way is to follow us on social media at 9994DM by downloading the 9994 app or Google 99.94 on podcast. We speak cricket.
Okay, so whatever else might be going on the pitch, there will be a test match between Australia and West Indies. The last time they were out here, it was pretty dismal. As I remember, it wasn't a great series, but it's a different team now.
Mm.
And as you mentioned before the break, they are a team that have had some success, most notably against England at home. Although I do feel that there needs to be a caveat with that, because whenever West Indies play at home to England, there just seems to be something a little extra that
Yeah.
comes out. Maybe it's those Colin Graves words where he disparaged them years ago, whatever it was. They seem to pull out something special, but they've had some success against Bangladesh as well. We've been out there watching them at training as well. They've got a particularly talented group of bowlers in this side, and also, I mean, I'm just a massive Craig Brathwaite fan. Did you know apparently the real way to pronounce his name is Bruffett? I've been told
Profit.
it's actually Bruffett is the like local way. Which there you go, fun fact. But most people, use the other one. What do you think? Is this going to be a bit like the time when Adam Voges ran
Oh.
rampant and scored 5,700,832 runs
Well, there is a Western Australian
or
who would love
something
to
like
do
that?
that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mean, look, at least going back to what you were saying earlier about what the build-up's been like in Perth, it's been from a positive angle, it's been about Cam Green and that elusive Test 100. He could have got it a few times last year during the Ashes. He nearly got it in Sri Lanka. But this could well be, the series, the season where he does, make that Test 100. So, and who knows, he could do a Adam Voges, but it won't be as straightforward as people are making it out to be against this West Indies attack. The one disappointment, though, was from they trained for the first time today in Perth. It was a pretty optional training session because the fast bowlers are just coming off the strain of having played the 4-day game. So there were no Roach or Alzari Joseph. They didn't come for practice, but Jaden Seals, who I was really looking forward to seeing live, he's I think he came to the tour, or he injured his knee during the CPL. So people thought he did play, I think, the 4-day game, and there was this feeling that he might be fit, but he bowled just a few deliveries today, and he uh, had to be pulled out of the center wicket nets, and I saw him kick a bottle. He was pretty disappointed. So, and he kept pointing towards his knee. I don't know what that means. That would be a big disappointment just because he's the next exciting thing. He's not supposed to be really quick, but I've seen him on TV, like he swings the ball, he seams the ball. So it would have been good to see him. But Alzari Joseph is at his peak at 26. I saw him in Hobart in the T20 World Cup. He was bowling proper pace, and he just seems to have grown into his body as well. Thankfully, no more injuries for him. And Kima Roach is still around, the veteran. And Jason Holder, who, funnily enough, I was just interviewing. That's why I'm late. Sorry. I interviewed him first like 12 years ago. So it felt like both of us have gray in our beard now, even though I think his has come from being out in the sun, mine by sitting in the AC in a way. But he's back in a way, and he's not captain anymore. So he plays a big role in this side. And he spoke a lot about legacy. I think the interview will be out sometime tomorrow or day after. You can all read it. But it was interesting listening to him just talk about what West Indies cricket means to him and how he wants some positivity about this West Indian team to come through, and it's the players' responsibility. So hopefully they can put on a show. The batting's a concern for me. Like you said, uh, now you got me like, I don't know, but when I went to Barbados, they all called him Brathwaite, so I don't know when the Braffit happened, but like maybe some Bajans call him, pronounce it the way you do, at least from my memory, like when he did play in the test in Barbados, they all called him Brathwaite, so I don't know, maybe it's changed. He and Tejnarayan Chanderpaul.
By the way, that came from the great Philip Spooner, who is their media manager. He said that is the Bayesian way to pronounce his name.
Well, Philip Spooner has then led me down the wrong path. Then, considering he's been around. He's so good to see him back, right? Like he was gone for a few years, so it's always good to have Spoons around. But yeah, the batting is a little concern for me, purely because um, yeah, they are in a state of transition, right? Like Bonner scored some runs. I like Shama Brooks. He's such a technically correct sound player. But they have a lot of those guys in there. So then the Jermaine Blackwood is the one guy who you'd back to uh, take on the opposition. So for him to come off in these pitches, it's going to be interesting. Obviously, you'll hear a lot more about the West Indian side on our wonderful West Indies cricket podcast, which is also part of the 99.94 family. Look how I've become very good at these plugs for our fellow brethren and sisterin on the Jared's Kingdom, in Jared's Kingdom, I must say. But yeah, so there's some question marks about the batting, but the bowling, I think, will be good to watch, especially if the pitches, or at least the pitch at the Optus Stadium, is anything like what we saw during the World Cup. Then it's going to be very, very exciting. That'll be a lot of fun to watch. And but I do have a sneaky little feeling, Melinda Farrell, this will be the summer of Smith, but I think it also is going to be the summer of Green.
Yeah. Well, because I was going to talk about Steve Smith. The stuff that he said, because he obviously read, there was a piece by Greg Chappell in the Age and Sydney Morning Herald about the changes that he'd made, and particularly the way that his batting had been since he was hit on the head and concussed by Jofra Archer at Lords in 2019. And to see him, apparently he agreed. He sent him a message to say that he agreed with everything Chappell had said. And
Right.
to sort of see him say during that one-day series where he spoke a lot about the technical changes that he'd made, him not moving about so much with all the little quirks, being more side on, all those little technical adjustments, and him sort of saying to Dave Warner in the middle, I'm back, I'm back, baby. It could be, when I talk about Adam Voges making all those runs when West Indies were out here before, I think Smith, if he does feel that confident about everything clicking, it could be quite scary for oppositions, both West Indies and South Africa to come, because he certainly looked in absolutely sublime form during the one-day series against England. So if it's all clicking for him, and he is that player, right? He's the player, he can't stand to see his shoelaces when he looks down. It's all for him just about everything being absolutely right.
Yeah.
So when he gets to this point, which he says he is now, that everything sort of feels like it has clicked and it's absolutely right, then, that is quite scary. One thing about Cameron Green on the pitch there as well, Mitch Marsh told me when I was over there for the T20 series before the World Cup against England.
Yeah.
Mitch said that the pitch at the the pitch at the Optus Stadium, when they've prepared it right, is quicker than the
Yes.
WACA pitch.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just the WACA pitch in its later years when it wasn't as quick. I don't know, but it's really really quick, an absolute belter. But Cameron Green, of course, when he made his Australian debut in front of his home crowd in that series, he actually had a bit of a stinker of a game. He didn't have a very good
Mm.
one. So, and all his family were there for that one. So let's hope that he does have a good one in front of his family this time.
Yeah, oh, for sure. And I think our old friend Callum Ferguson summed up the difference between the Waka and the Optus perfectly. I think it was during the Australia Sri Lanka game. It was on the sidelines. Louis Cameron and I were talking to him, and he said the difference when it comes to bounce and pace is at the Waka, the bounce was a lot linear. So it would kind of, that's why, I mean, you would hear all these stories about how Jeff Thompson bowled one ball which kind of flew and hit the side screen and all of that, right? But at the Optus, it's more tennis bouncy, a tennis bally. So it's more at the batter's throat, and that's why you saw a lot of batters during the T20 World Cup get out trying to hook and like kind of top edging. So that's the adjustment you have to make. So apart from being quick, like you said, Mel, it's also it's more like, it's more vertical, the bounce. So it's kind of at the batter always. So that'll be a challenge to see, and that's the thing as well, right? We haven't in a way, COVID just burnt it for the Optus Stadium. Like, it was just creating some sort of momentum for itself. We had a really good test match against India, okay test match against New Zealand, but it was all building up nicely, and then of course COVID ruined everything. So yeah, it'll be fascinating. I think at least the West Indies have. The one thing I'm happy about is they're going to play these two test matches in interesting conditions, where the conditions will give them an opening. Whether they make the most of it or not, I don't know. Like, imagine if they had to, with this team, play at the MCG, which is actually, I mean, not Boland's MCG, but the normal MCG or an SCG pitch. I wouldn't have expected much from them. But like in these conditions, like, who knows? I mean, if not winning the test match, at least they have the potential to get into positions where they'll have like a few good sessions.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to watch. And, I just hope that as many fans as possible do turn up. And I do hope that they don't boo. I wouldn't like to see that at all. So let's hope that we can finally get some positivity happening around the actual cricket. Okay, we're going to take another short break. And when we get back, we're going to discuss the conclusion to the WBBL.
If you love the language of cricket and want more, then head over to the 99.94 app and you can hear all of our podcasts and cricket commentary. We're adding new shows all the time and covering cricket series from all over the world. Be the first to hear all of our announcements by following us on social media at 9994DM. Welcome to Cricket's Conversation.
Well, after a stunning WBBL, you'd have to say, a year after they finished as wooden spooners and had a pretty miserable time of it, everything looked absolutely wonderful for the Sydney Sixers in the form of their life under the coaching auspices of Charlotte Edwards, with Anya Shrubsole in there as well. And unfortunately for them, they came up against the Adelaide Strikers, particularly their bowling
Mm.
lineup, which was absolutely superb in the final. The Strikers coming away with the title in the end. It was all they just sort of blew them away, really, didn't they?
Yeah,
In that chase,
exactly.
what were they, were like 4 for 17, or it was really quite incredible, and they did reasonably well to sort of make a bit of a fist of it and a fight, I guess, the Sixers. But it was one of those games when you lose all those wickets in the power play, it's going to be so hard to come back.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, bowlers win your tournaments in T20 cricket, right? We've seen it all around the world, and that's exactly what happened. Like you said, this is a sensational bowling attack that the Adelaide Strikers have. And sorry, I thought someone knocked. Adelaide Strikers have, and like you said, the game was more or less over in the power play. It's a pretty, I wouldn't say a one-sided final, but a pretty, yeah, it was one-sided. Eventually, I think it turned out to be quite one-sided. Like, some funny moments, of course, that I'm sure everybody would have picked up on social media, where they stopped play because it was too bright, and that lovely exchange between it was Amanda Jade Wellington and Susie Bates, wasn't it? Yeah, it was. I'm pretty sure. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it was. When basically, so in case people did miss it, essentially the setting sun was getting in Susie Bates's eyes, which was really unusual. So, and Amanda Jade Wellington really wanted her to get on with the game
yes,
and was walking
she
down, going,
really
"Yeah,
did.
come on, we can do it." Um,
It's
yeah, so
cricket.
it's
It's cricket.
unusual. I mean, my favorite stoppage of play is usually bees, but
Oh
a
yes.
setting sun isn't bad either.
I think as a bowling group, it's a bowling group that kind of got them into the final. And then when you have like a superstar like Deandra Doughton, like you just, I saw her do it way back in the 2013 Women's World Cup in Mumbai. It seems like a long, long time ago when she was. I think that she really announced herself during that tournament. You'll remember, Mel, and to see her still winning games. Of course, she doesn't play for West Indies anymore, and I remember I did some Shield commentary with Gemma Barsby, and she was saying they kept trying to like prod Deandra to say why she quit West Indies cricket, and she was very tight-lipped about it apparently. So she had said at that point that I'll spend the WBBL trying to get the real story, and she'll tell me someday. But yeah, and Gemma Barsby had a very good tournament as well, so that's good. I was very happy for her. I was really fond of her, just about how openly she speaks about everything she's overcome in her life. So that it was good to see her succeed as well. But yeah, I mean, and funnily enough, when I was leaving Adelaide, when was it? Yesterday. The camera crew all set up at the airport, because and for a second I was wondering what was happening, and then it struck me the strikers were returning with the WBBL trophies. That was pretty sweet.
Yeah, that's nice. Do you know, with one thing that I thought was great, she is, give her some credit, a wonderful statesperson for the sport in Elise Perry. The speech she gave afterwards, where she spoke
Yeah.
about the importance of the fan support for women's cricket and women's
Yes.
sport, I thought, did the rounds on social media, and I thought it was really, really well said. I thought she spoke so beautifully about that, because it's been a tough season for the WBBL in that
Mm.
it was up against the T20 Men's World Cup for so much of it, and that did suck a lot of the media oxygen
Yeah.
out of the WBBL sales, especially after last year when there were still border closures going on. So it was a much more captive audience, I think,
Yes.
for the competition last year. So it has been a bit more difficult, I think, for the WBBL to get the same sorts of headlines. But I just thought the way she spoke at the end of it was absolutely wonderful. And if nothing else, at least for the Sixers, after a pretty miserable
Yeah.
year last year, where, I think Charlotte Edwards said that they were just worn down by all the bubble life, and everything just felt a bit negative. So she tried to revamp that, and it's a wonderful reflection on Charlotte Edwards' skills as a coach too. I think as
Mm.
a manager of players and people, that she was able to lead such a remarkable turnaround for them. So yes, so that
Yeah.
was really good. Well, that probably wraps things up for our podcast today. We're going to do a couple more this week, while you're over there and I'm over here, and we'll have some actual cricket to talk about, which
Yeah, that'll
which
be
is
good.
nice. You're going to miss me though, aren't you? Say yes, even though if you don't mean it, you don't mean it, but say yes, you'll miss me because I got FOMO.
You and your FOMO. No, I need to get rid of this FOMO. That's what I'm working on. So if I say I miss you, then the FOMO will just get accentuated. So no, we need to work on this FOMO business, Mel. It doesn't do anyone any good. This FOMO, just what is that? It's much ado with nothing, right? I got it right. Yeah, at least I got it.
About nothing, much ado
Ah,
about
crap!
nothing.
Almost much ado about nothing. There you go.
Okay, that does it. We're going to have to work on your Shakespeare
On Shakespeare.
between
Yeah,
now and the
yeah.
next one.
Hell hath
Yeah,
no
I have to
fury
send you.
like a woman scorned. Is that Shakespeare?
Yeah,
Sorry.
see, you're scorning me now. You're scorning me, and hell hath no fury. But look, thanks for listening to Australia on 99.94, where we speak cricket every day. Please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you enjoy your podcasts. You can download the 99.94 app and follow us on Twitter at Melinda Farrell and at BeastieBoy07. Never miss out. Join our 24/7 conversation on social media and follow us at 9994DM. Cricket, every day, your way.